Kevin is a former Pentagon reporter, a defense analyst, former executive editor of Defense One, a military publication or publication focused on the military. So he is very, very plugged in to what is happening at the Pentagon and elsewhere in the military. Sorry, I wanted to give you that street cred, Kevin. So tell us about this purge that happened on Friday night.
Man, they're calling it a Friday night massacre. Yeah. So, more than expected, the firings began at the Pentagon. So we've heard of all the other agencies that were getting their due from DOJ. This was a little different. We've expected since the campaign days that if Trump won, that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown, was soon to be a goner. There was no secret. It was no surprise. A lot of the surrogates around him were saying it openly. Pete Hegseth himself had said it on air that Brown should be fired. And
But why?
they put,
Because usually
yeah,
the chairman of the Joint Chiefs sticks around even if there's a change in administration. And he was actually appointed during the first Trump administration, correct?
yeah. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting if he came in right after or
No,
during at the end. Yeah.
he did.
Um, um, the answer is race, and it's in short. CQ Brown has been a vocal and early proponent for all of the Pentagon's DEI programs for diversity, equity, inclusion, going all the way back to the George Floyd protests. The summer of those, 2020 was it?
Yes.
And how he was one of the earliest, maybe the first major, officer to come online with a real supportive statement saying, we at the Pentagon support inclusion, that's yada, 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 which was important then as a message to the force also. It's important for the generals to kind of signal out to the rest of the very large multi-million size military and defense department how to respond to these political moments. From that day on, people think he's had a target on his back, metaphorically, for a firing. That this is an administration who came in with people like Pete Hegseth who hate DEI. They say it openly, they say it proudly. He has said it all the way through his confirmation hearings to his first speeches in the Pentagon. So it was I've just been waiting. Like I can't believe it took this long. Even on day one, there were it was news headlines that Hegseth arrived at the Pentagon to a waiting Chairman General Brown, and they walked in together. And Brown said he's here to support and salute as he's asked to do by the president.
Well, I know that he was not included in any kind of military conversation. So the handwriting was seemingly on the wall. But there were other people in this sort of very, the highest ranking military people in the whole system. There was a woman from the Navy as
The
well.
chief of naval operations, yeah, the head admiral, Admiral Franchetti, Lisa Franchetti, who was the first woman to be nominated to that post. If you remember, before her, back literally like day one, week one of the Trump administration, it was the Coast Guard commandant, the top general or admiral, excuse me, of the Coast Guard, who also was a woman who had been sacked. So I saw overnight a post of the family portrait of all the current Joint Chiefs of Staff and the chairman and the vice chairman, and it said only two people from this are missing now, and it's the black man and the woman. All the white men in that picture have kept their jobs.
Yeah. So how surprising is this? And is this something that we should be concerned about? And if so, why?
Well, like I said, it's not surprising that they fired General Brown. It's not surprising even that Franchetti, her name was on the list as well. I think what's going to be surprising is how, just like all the other agencies that have gone through these DOJ cuts, how they hit the Pentagon. We had heads up. Really the press corps that lives there. I'm not a daily press corps guy anymore in the Pentagon, but they have been reporting that on Friday they had expected the start of these cuts. Some were saying 5,000, 6,000, many more thousand, and that by early Friday morning it was paused to let the Office of General Counsel, the Pentagon's lawyers, look at this, because the Pentagon's different than all the rest of the agencies. They have different rules for hiring, different rules for firing. You actually have to make sure you're not hurting national security when you fire somebody. And I think maybe by the time it became the Pentagon's turn, even the administration wanted to slow it down a bit and not go through some of the same mistakes they had before.
Having
What was your second
said that, wait, sorry.
question? What was your second question? I
So
forgot.
no. Well, I was going to say is before we talk about how concerning this
Yeah, yeah.
is, many people are upset, Kevin, about them getting rid of the JAG
Yes.
Corps, which Pete Hegseth has also derided as jagoffs or something like that in the past during interviews. Talk about what the JAG Corps does and why it's so important.
Yeah, the JAG are the lawyers of the military, and remember the military has its own legal system, the Universal Code of Military Justice, and the UCMJ. And so the assumption is that President Trump has removed those top lawyers from the. There's a JAG for the Air Force, Army, for the each service branch,
Each
and
branch of the service has a
yeah.
JAG Corps.
I think the Army is at your alma mater. The JAG off the school is at out at UVA in Charlottesville.
Wahoo wah.
Yeah, there.
Okay. Yeah.
So getting rid of them is getting rid of the lawyers, just like they've removed or fired the inspectors general at a lot of the agencies as well. These are the people
Right.
that decide whether orders are lawful orders that are okay to be passed down to the force. Now, when does this matter? Why does it matter? Well, if you go back not too long ago, and probably currently, in the drone wars, every time there was a drone strike, those drone strikes go through lawyers before the button is hit, or at least before the mission goes out. That they're following all of the legal parameters they need to follow, from whether it's chain of command or anything else. So the idea is that, or the criticism is that Trump and his team, they're putting the thumb on the scale, stacking the deck, they're changing the rules, they're cheating, they're getting rid of anybody that may challenge the president's authority and his interpretation of the law. And the president said this earlier in the week when the White House put out a statement saying only the president and the attorney general, I think they said, would be are to be considered the only ones who have any final interpretation of the law, right? It was ridiculous, but that's where they are. So they're extending that same thinking that only President Trump's interpretation of the law is valid. They're extending that to the military.
So the JAG officers will not be replaced. They have basically just gotten rid of those
I
offices.
I no, I think they will be. I think they replaced. They asked for the people in those offices of the head of the JAG. I mean, they're gigantic commands. There's thousands of lawyers in the military, so they got rid of the head ones, and it's assumed they will be replaced, by loyalists who will agree with that theory that if Trump says it, what did Nixon say? If the president says it, it's not illegal.
Tell me, what kind of message do you think this is sending to all of our men and women in the military service?
Well, there's a couple ways to look at it. And so first, if you look at it through Trump's side, they think they are doing nothing wrong. That this president won his election fair and square. He's the commander in chief. He gets to have any general he wants serving in those positions. And these are, especially if they're general officers who are nominated and they go through confirmation, it's a presidential appointment. So he can pick and choose whoever he wants for any reason. It's the tradition, the morals, the career. There's lots of other reasons why it's just so out of practice, or if that's one complaint about it. But it's also potentially harmful for the mission. It's harmful for national security and this has never happened before, to have so many top officers wiped out of their jobs and to be replaced so openly with loyalists. And they're not like hiding this. They're not saying no, we just want somebody better for the job. They're saying they want loyalists. They want either you get in line or you get out of the way. That's troubling for lots of reasons, right? Go back
Right.
to General Milley. General Milley was the one who, as he left in his final farewell speech, he took a dig at Trump, saying, we in the service raise our hand and we swear our loyalty to the Constitution, not to any person, not to any dictator, and he said not to any wannabe dictator, right? That was direct zing at Trump. Very unusual. So it sends a big message to the force that's pretty cooling, pretty chilling, saying you better get in line. And it's up to, I think also it sends a pretty, it's, it's a different, it's a different way to teach young people in the military how the military should engage with their political civilian leadership and what their role is, right? So I I'm reminded sometimes, and I'll tell people, if you live and work at the Pentagon, like I did for so many years, that people do, it's actually one of the rare bases around the world that has more officers than enlisted men and women, right? The Pentagon is like a big pyramid of millions of 20-year-olds, and there's a few 60-year-olds up top who are get to be the 4-star generals and admirals, and it's up to them to train and teach those who come after them how to relate to the general public, how to be a soldier or an airman or whatever it might be. Part of that is how you relate to the press and how you respond to your civilian leaders. I think that's why right now you're not hearing from a whole lot of retired admirals and generals protesting. We know they don't like what's going on. There are some who are coming out in support of General Brown, saying this is not how he should be treated. He's distinguished 40 years. But they're not coming out complaining that what Trump is doing is illegal or is even wrong. And I think that's deliberate. I know that a lot of them feel if they do think that, there are people in the military who will believe them and want to follow them down a path differently than just saluting and serving the president like you're supposed to. It's potentially mutiny. If there's a cadre of retired generals who comes out saying what Trump is doing is wrong, it gives license to people in the service to say, well, then I don't have to do it, or maybe I shouldn't do it, and then we're in real trouble.
I wanted to ask you about the person that President Trump has said will replace General Brown as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. It's a guy who's a lieutenant general. His last name is Kane. His nickname is Raisin, like Raising Cane, R.
So
And
good. So good.
and apparently Donald Trump saw him at some event. He has expressed support. There's a rumor that he wore a MAGA hat, but he denies that. But the bottom line is, this guy is not does not have the traditional experience that most chairmen of the Joint Chiefs would have. Can you explain that?
Yeah, and you mentioned earlier too, it's very unusual for a chairman to be pulled out of his job before completing his 4-year service term, right? The last time I remember this happening was General Peter Pace back at the beginning of the Obama administration, because Pace disagreed with letting gays serve openly in the military. He disagreed with removing the do not ask, don't tell policy. So that was 15 years ago. I don't know, a long time ago. Yeah, so usually, I think it's a requirement, unless the president waives it, you have to have served as one of the joint chiefs of the service branches before you're appointed to be the chairman, right? So like General Dempsey he had been the commander of not even a COCOM, I think it was Army Transportation Command, and they made him Army Chief of Staff, the head of the Army, very briefly, so that he could quickly get him in position to make him the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, to kind of check the box of that qualification. Admiral Mullen, or Mike Mullen, he was commanding the fleet out in, I think, Italy. I forget which one, 5th or 6th Fleet out there. Pardon me, look it up. Before they made him the Chief of the Navy, and then it was very quick, and then he became the chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself. So, Lieutenant General, 3-star, not a 4-star, 3-star, to go from that to get your 4-star and immediately become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs is unprecedented. Absolutely. He has not commanded. He wasn't a combatant command like Lloyd Austin was, or commanding the entire region of the Middle East. He wasn't a service chief, and so this is quite the leap. He wasn't even in the military. He's retired.
And in fact, Donald Trump talked about him and some of his colleagues. And the most notable thing about him was his name and the fact that they looked like they were out of central casting. That if he was making a movie about the military, these guys would star
Yeah,
in it. So I think he's
yeah.
very.
We know what's funny about that. That's how Mark Milley got the job, right? If you remember, Mark Milley wasn't supposed to be the next chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was the Army chief at the time. People assumed it was going to go to General David Goldfein, who was the Air Force Chief of Staff. Goldfein is a small guy. He's a soft-spoken guy. He's a smart Air Force guy. People think that the Air Force guys are nerds. Mark Milley, as we all know, is Mark Milley. He's gruff, he's thick-necked, he's got a Boston accent, he's just brazen as can be, and Trump loved him, fell in love with him, and had no idea what he was getting.
Wow. I mean, it's nice when the qualifications are so deep, isn't it? Somebody who follows me asked about the ramifications or the impact all this will have on some of our foreign enemies, specifically places like China. Do you think they're watching what's happening in our military carefully?
Of course, you know that. Of course they do. I mean, everyone is. I don't know. I would assume they're seeing this as just one drop in the bucket of chaos going on in Washington right now. You know, there's with the Doge firings, you know, the Doge people canceled all of the new applicants coming into CIA, and I had remember that story, and they were all a bunch of China experts that we got rid of. Um, Again, the week coming ahead might be even more consequential than these firings on Friday at the Pentagon, because coming ahead is when we're going to get the cuts, and we've got a signal from that already from Hegseth and the administration that they plan on shifting, what they say, 8% of the budget from one thing to another. Part of that shift, people think, is going to be away from things that traditionally are expected to help defend and deter from against China, meaning um, big old weapon systems like manned fighter jets. Elon Musk has made it public. He doesn't like manned fighter jets. He likes drones. He likes robots and computers. He thinks that's the future of the force. A lot of people don't disagree with him, but most people think we still need both and we're
Right.
going to need both for a long time.
Especially as we're making the
Yeah.
transition. It's like you can't rely solely on either.
Yeah. Also, you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense are supposed to be the two strategic brains of the military, right? The chairman is not in the chain of command. Your viewers should know if they don't, and I'm sure you remember all this from your Pentagon days. The chain of command goes from the combatant commander who's in charge of like the Indo-Pacific or Europe or Northcom in America. It goes from that guy or woman to the Secretary of Defense to the president, the commander in chief. That's it. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs is pulled by law, pulled out of the chain of command to just be an advisor. He's literally, his title is senior military advisor to the president. Now, he runs the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He's the chairman of that group. By default, or by practice in the military, that's the big boss. When the chairman walks in the room, everybody stops talking, all the heads turn. You better listen up. Even though he's not the chain of command, what he says goes, and what he wants to go goes. And usually it's hand in hand with the defense secretary. Can you tell me, Katie, what's Pete Hegseth's, I don't know, strategy for the Indo-Pacific? What's his theory of U.S. military intervention abroad? Nobody knows, and no one knows anything about good old General Raising Cane.
And the Secretary of Defense doesn't necessarily have military experience, right? I mean, with Dick Cheney, for example, didn't have military experience. In Pete Hegseth's case, he did have some military experience and got a Bronze Star, but he has never run sort of or been in charge of any of these theaters or any of these gigantic operations. Before we go,
Well,
Kevin, I wanted to. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead.
yeah, to General Kane's credit, I mean, one of his last posts in government was at CIA. He was like the military advisor at CIA. He has some experience in these organizations at high level, and you know, it's no small thing to be a 3-star and have that job. But again, it's not command. It's not the command level that's expected, or either by rule or law or tradition for this kind of position. And immediately he's supposed to be the senior military advisor to the president. I don't know what he knows about Russia. I don't know what he thinks about China. I don't know what he thinks about the American industrial base, about what kind of weapons we need for the future, how to recruit for the force, whether women should or shouldn't be in
Well, Well, he
combat.
said they shouldn't, although he walked that back. Oh, you're talking about Kane or Hegseth?
Kane, yeah, Kane.
Kane. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
But I
Uh,
mean, same thing for Hegseth. We know so little, and you know, I said coming home from Munich, I said this on a show recently to you. We were at the Munich Security Conference, and Hegseth was going through Europe, and he kept posting pictures in the morning of doing workouts with the local troops that he was with, which is fine. Others have kind of done that. And we were on the flight home, and the person next to me showed me their phone, and there he was posting another picture on a jog with more troops in Europe. And I said, you know, I don't know what the Secretary of Defense wants to do about China, but I know he likes to run. I've seen his workout pictures. Like, we just don't know.
before we go, I wanted to ask you about Elon Musk's edict to government employees that he issued yesterday. Basically, I guess on his social media platform, the way things are happening is so bizarre, Kevin. But he basically said that every government employee needed to outline what they did last week that bullet points would be fine. And if people didn't comply, it would be tantamount to giving their resignation. You are in DC. I know you know a lot of people who work for the government. I do too. I've tried to talk to get them to do an interview with me. They're too afraid to speak on camera. People are terrified. But can you just tell us what the reaction has been to that and how unprecedented that kind of demand is? I found it to be insulting and demeaning and humiliating and cruel personally, treating these lifelong civil servants that way, or public servants too. And I'm curious what the feedback has been in DC among federal workers, Kevin.
Yeah, I'll add it's also ridiculous and a little crazy, and according to a lot of the federal workers, possibly illegal. Like federal workers have pretty protected jobs, and for a reason. And we know that Trump kind of hates that. He wants to make more workers as political appointees so he can fire them. He thinks the entire federal government is just saturated with liberals who are out to get him and don't want to execute his policies when he puts them through. That was his experience in the first 4 years of office, that he thought, well, we all heralded as guardrails. He thinks now we're barriers, and he's trying to get rid of them all. And Elon is agreeing with him, and so is all of his cabinet members saying, what Trump says goes. He's portrayed himself as a king, and getting, like we talked about with the JAG, getting rid of all these things. So yes, Elon tweets this thing, surprising everybody. Then there's an actual email from OPM, from hr@opm.gov, which is an email apparently, to the entire force, not force, the entire federal government. There's like 3 million civilians in the federal government. It's insane. They all got this, and everybody on a Saturday trying to figure out what's going on. What I've heard, the reporting I keep seeing is almost all of these security agencies have told their employees, do not respond to this email. That we will decide whether or not to proceed or what we want to do, what to ask you. Hegseth, this came from DoD to their force. The NSA said it to their force. Tulsi Gabbard put one out to the entire intelligence community. Kash Patel had to say it to the FBI. So these people, Trump's national security team had to immediately contradict Elon's request. Others have not. They're like I saw CISA, the cybersecurity agency that's part of DNI, I think technically. They told their force, you better answer this email by midnight on Monday and do what it says.
No, isn't it by noon or is it by midnight?
Oh,
I thought it was
11:15. You might be right. I forget.
Yeah.
But
I could be
yes,
wrong though. I could have
you're
misread
right.
it.
I do live in Northern Virginia. There's a lot of federal employees. My whole neighborhood is like intelligence and Pentagon people that hop on the bus and they commute to work and they commute to the federal government. This is where they work. And after years of covering the defense and intelligence world, there's a lot of traffic on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is very popular for the intelligence and national security and defense industrial world. There's a lot of these are corporate jobs and technology jobs, and it's become a very active place to see people posting their WTF reactions about losing their jobs and what do you do now. And there are a lot of, because Defense One that I worked for was a spinoff of Government Exec magazine, which covered the federal government for 60 years. And so I still track what a lot of them are doing. I recommend everybody go follow Government Executive because they're covering what's happening to the federal workforce, what your responses may or may not be, what the labor unions for the federal government are how they're responding and what they're telling their members, and it's very contradictory. Some of them are saying you better follow the order, and others are saying don't follow the order. I've seen some cheeky replies from some of the agency heads themselves saying, I know what you should tell Elon, tell them, we're doing our jobs, that we upheld the Constitution and we fulfilled our mission just like we said we would. It's nuts.
So I guess the question is, you said they have protections. So do they have a leg to stand on in terms of legally if they don't comply? Will they be able to basically fire them because they quote unquote consider it a resignation? Is it? I guess no one really knows, and it's varying from agency to agency. I don't know.
I'm not a lawyer. I didn't sleep on a Holiday Inn Express last night, but so I'm not going to give legal advice here. I will say it seems, this group of people, the Dogeman, they're you're not asking permission, right? They're not even asking forgiveness. They're just going to break it and say, if you want to challenge it, take it to court, knowing Trump already has immunity from the Supreme Court, and they're just gonna assume they're gonna get away with all this. What's been, I think, a big reason they might be pausing on the national security side was the nuclear administration debacle last week. If you remember that, the national nuclear, oh, I'm going to mess up their name, the nuclear administration that manages the nuclear weapons, which is out of the Department of Energy. They had received, this summary execution kind of notice, like all the other agencies, before somebody raised a hand and said, "Do you know what those people do, by the way?" And then they all were given their jobs back. If you can find them, the same thing in the Pentagon. These are Title X jobs, and there has to be a review that you're not going to hurt national security by canceling these jobs. You can't just do it. I don't know. In a lot of things in this world, there's usually some sort of national security waiver clause baked in where a president can just, with the stroke of a pen, get past the rule. But I don't know. And so one would hope that, yes, even Pete Hegseth will allow the Office of General Counsel to take a look at these things to make sure we're okay. Now, I'll tell you, some of these offices, I'm sure, are expendable, and some of them, they're guys who have their finger on the button, and that's their job. But Defense One and GovExec were reporting on Friday, there was just confusion everywhere, including like the Air Force Materiel Command, who's in charge of moving weapons and equipment around, or the Army Medical Command. A lot of the Navy offices were unclear. I can kind of guess maybe some of those might be, but the Pentagon is enormous, right? There's so many different offices. There's school systems around the world. There's health. It's the largest healthcare system in the country. Who knows who's going to get cut this week and how drastic it's going to be.
And, as you mentioned, Kevin, the government probably could use a reduction in force, whatever you want to call it, or reforming. But the way it's being conducted, kind of this sledgehammer, reckless, heartless approach is
Legal,
really
potentially illegal.
potential legal approach is really creating such a chaotic situation. And it really seems like amateur hour, in my opinion. But
People are losing their careers. I mean, again, I was in Germany and I spoke to a couple FBI agents on the side who were like, I've been out here for 5 years, or I've been out here for a certain amount of time, and there are FBI agents that get deployed overseas too, and they work on crime and terrorism and all
and they've
sorts of
been trained
things.
and put
They're
in a
highly
lot of
trained.
time.
They're having lifetime of service, and they're also similar to the military. They get to a certain amount of years, and you get your pension, you get your retirement. And there are people that are like, we're hearing a lot about people that just came into the service or just came into the federal government or the probationary, and they finally got their dream job, and the rug got pulled out from under them. I think about the other side, especially in the military. The minute they cancel commands, there are going to be people that have, put in their time, and they're this close to retirement, and they might lose their jobs. And or families in the military. When Tommy Tuberville puts a hold on a senator or on a command, it keeps the next person who was supposed to fill that job is also waiting, and so is the person to fill that job and the person to fill that job. So you have this long chain, and everybody underneath who works with them. You end up very quickly getting hundreds of people with families around the world frozen, and they're waiting on when the school starts, when they can, if they're going to play in the basketball league, when they're going to apply to colleges. There's enormous effects on effects on effects to these moves that we can't even keep up with practically in the news because there's so much coming
And
now.
I feel like there's no consideration for the human toll this is taking on people. Kevin, thank you for spending some time with me on this Sunday afternoon. As you can see, it's still light here. I know it's cold and terrible there, and I feel guilty because it's like 80 degrees here.
You don't feel guilty. You don't.
I do. I feel bad. I do. I feel. I mean, I do. I kind of feel bad, but it's. I really appreciate you giving us some
Of
perspective
course.
because I just want people to know the impact of what's happening. And I know a lot of people are tuning out. I can't say I blame them, but these things are too important to not at least be aware of what's going on and how it impacts so many people and the country in general in terms of what's happening here and
Yeah,
abroad.
I hope it helps. So if you want to know more about that stuff, it's providing everybody a good lens on the difference between government and politics. And news agencies like Government Executive is just one example of one. So you can really find a lot of information about how this works. It's not like any other type of employment,
Yeah.
and these are real effects coming down. So
People are
yeah,
getting a civics lesson, unfortunately, the wrong way, I think.
yeah.
But Kevin, great to
You
see you,
too.
and hopefully I'll talk to you soon. And everyone watching, I hope this was useful. I learned a lot, so thanks, Kevin.
Always.
Okay,
Thanks, Kate.
see you guys. Bye.